Welcome to Invest Out West podcast. I'm Nat Micken.
And I'm Carlia Micken. We are a husband and wife team who live and invest in Western Queensland.
Join us on our journey of creating passive income through mindset, business, crypto, and property investing. Welcome to episode 7 of Invest Out West podcast.
Today we want to lead with a passage out of the book Think and Go Rich that ties in with this episode, and the passage reads, "The person who stops studying merely because he has finished school is forever hopelessly doomed to mediocrity, no matter what may be his calling. The way of success is the way of continuous pursuit of knowledge."
The book Think and Grow Rich has some incredible gems, and I believe that's one of them. We chose that piece there today because of this episode, which is going to go into detail about the podcasts that we listen to. Now, we've been listening to these particular podcasts for a fair while, most of them, and when I counted up the number of podcasts I listened to, it come to 21, and it sort of surprised me a bit because I didn't really realise there was that many, but we sort of, sometimes when we talk to people about listening to podcasts and they'll say, I don't have time to listen to podcasts or something like that, and I just sort of think back to that piece that Carlia read out there. They're hopelessly doomed to a life of mediocrity, and it's knowledge. Knowledge. Some people say knowledge is power, but it's applied knowledge is the powerful bit. And we could go and listen to all the podcasts in the world, but unless we actually put in the effort of doing what we learn, then it means nothing. But the first step is learning, going ahead and learning, and then the doing after that. And so that's sort of what I wanted to touch on to start with before I went into our list of podcasts. It's just a case of putting in the time every day, basically every single day. We always listen to some podcasts, and it's just that constant learning that makes a difference. So that's sort of a bit of an outline about the view we have on listening to podcasts. That's sort of one of the reasons why we started this podcast, because we wanted to put our knowledge on record to help other people, like a lot of other people help us with their podcasts. And so what goes around comes around, sort of thing. So to start off, to start with my list of podcasts that I listen to, I'll start with the property ones. So I've got these all split up into property podcasts, crypto podcasts, self-storage, and sort of general sort of podcasts, general mindset and that sort of thing. So to start with the property ones, number one on the list is it's called Australian Property Investors. It's also got a name, a Property Investory, and that's done by Tyrone Sham, and we find that a pretty good podcast to listen to. He just has guests on there every episode, and there's sort of it's sort of straight to the point. I find it a good podcast to listen to, simply because it's mostly just all about the guest. Just, they just say what they have to say, and all the sort of other stuff is cut out, sort of thing. So it's sort of good straight to the point sort of a podcast. The next one on the list is Sophisticated Property Investing. Now that's done by Frank Flegg, and he is in the UK. And for our style of property investing, I find that would be the closest podcast that I've found to match our style of investing. He's got a massive residential portfolio mainly, and he just sort of grows that every year, and it's every day. He's always buying more, and an incredible mindset he's got. How he can just keep all the balls in the air, and so I always listen to every episode that Frank puts out on sophisticated property investing. Now, number 3 on the list is called Commercial Property Show Australia, done by Andrew Bean. Now, that is, like the name suggests, it's a commercial property podcast, Australian one. There isn't too many commercial property podcasts out there, so that's sort of why I listen to that one, just because of our interests in the commercial property space. Number 4 on the list is called Dubai Property Podcast. Now, there's a fella on there. The host of that is a fella called Craig, and I don't think I actually know his last name, but it's, as the name suggests, Dubai is where he's based, and it's all about the Dubai property market and the UAE in general. Now, sort of, some people might question why I would listen to a podcast like that, but it's just that I like to keep across the whole world property market, and I just find that is a good sort of a podcast to listen to. It just tells you all about the property market in the UAE, so it's good to keep abreast of markets like that, I sort of think. And along the same lines, another one is called the Italian Real Estate Podcast. Now, there's usually a couple of fellas on there that do that, and the Italian names, I won't even have a go at pronouncing them, but they don't put out a lot of podcasts. They're only fairly few and far between, but same reason. I just like to listen to them just to keep abreast of a European market, and see what's going on in another part of the world with the property space. So that's the 5 I mainly listen to for property. Now, going into crypto podcasts. Number 1 on the list is Crypto 101. Now, that is, it's sort of, they're pretty much all the same crypto podcasts. They just sort of talk about the latest trends and that in the market at the time. They will get some different people on there to interview, and which is quite interesting. But just sort of your typical crypto podcast. Now, the next one, number 2 on the list, is Crypto Casey, and that's a girl that does that, and she has a YouTube channel as well, and it's just the podcast is off the YouTube channel. I watch her on YouTube as well. Fairly good insights into the crypto space. Does a lot of research into crypto, and very knowledgeable. And then number 3 on the list is called the Bad Crypto Podcast. Now, that's a couple of fellas called Joel Comm and Travis Wright. And that would probably be one of my favourite crypto podcasts. They're sort of fairly rough sort of fellas. It's not for the faint-hearted listening to them fellas, but they sort of do their show in a fairly jovial sort of a way, with a lot of jokes and that, and just sort of talk about the latest trends and that in the crypto market at the time, and they sort of put a light-hearted tone on it, which I find fairly good. And so that brings us to a close for the crypto podcasts I listen to. Now, as a lot of you would know, we're into self-storage, so I got 5 different self-storage podcasts here on the list. Now, they're all sort of fairly well the same. It's they're just is just a typical self-storage podcast. They just sort of talk about the latest trends and that, and that sort of thing in the self-storage space, and which I like to keep abreast of. So just to quickly run through them. Number 1 is Self-Storage Income by AJ Osborne. Number 2 is Hacking Self-Storage by Dean Booty. Number 3 is The Self-Storage Show by Jim Ross. Number 4 is Self-Storage Investing by Scott Myers. And number 5 is the Self-Storage University Podcast by Frank Rolfe. And the four of them out of the 5 are American podcasts. Dean Booty of Hacking Self-Storage is in the UK. That's the only UK one there. So that's sort of just a bit of a brief outline of the self-storage podcasts that I listen to. Now, just to go then into some general sort of podcasts, general mindset, sorts of just life in general sort of stuff, and like sort of money-minded sort of podcasts. So there's eight different podcasts here. Number 1 is The Wealthy Way by Ryan Pineda. Now he's got a book out of the same name. And he sort of, I haven't long started listening to him. It's sort of a lot about, he's very, he's a Christian-minded sort of a person, and so the podcast is, he makes no secret about his faith, and so he sort of incorporates that into his podcast as well. But it's all sort of about becoming wealthy, hence the name. Now the next one, number 2, is The Mindset Mentor by Rob Doyle, and as the name suggests, it's very much a mindset focused podcast. And number 3 is Quick Brain by Jim Quick, and now that is similar to The Mindset Mentor. He's a brain coach. Now Jim Quick had a brain injury when he was a kid and had really big trouble learning at school, learning to read, that sort of thing, and he eventually sort of started to study alternative ways and that of learning, and then sort of basically taught himself of how to actually learn when you have a brain injury or have learning difficulties. So I always struggled at school and that, so that's why I sort of listened to Jim Quick. Now, number 4 is called The Cardone Zone by Grant Cardone. Now, Grant Cardone is a fairly controversial figure. Some people love him, some people hate him, and I don't really have a view either way. It's just, if I can learn something off the man, then I'll listen to him. And so he has, like, probably not all what he says that I agree with, but there's always a lot in there that I do. He has a lot of podcasts that are very motivational, that sort of thing, and so it's always good to get that sort of perspective in your mind about thinking bigger and that sort of thing as well. So that's number 4. Number 5 is called The Gary V Audio Experience by Gary Vaynerchuk. Now, similar to Grant Cardone, a fairly controversial sort of a figure, and his podcast, he just puts out a massive amount of material all the time, so I only probably listen to maybe 10% of what he puts out, simply because you just can't keep up with it all. But he has some really good insights. He come from absolutely nothing, just like Grant Cardone, and built himself up. So I always like to listen to those sort of people who have been there and done it, travelled the road already, so you can sort of learn the pitfalls and learn what to do and what not to do. So that's number 5. Now, number 6 is called the Think Media Podcast by Sean Kennel. Now that is that's a podcast a lot to do with YouTube and how to make YouTube videos. So that's the reason I listen to that podcast is just to become better at my YouTube channel, and that's sort of the reason I got onto that podcast in the first place. And similar to Ryan Pineda of the Wealthy Way podcast, has a very big faith background and sort of incorporates that into his podcasts as well. And now number 7 is My First Million. Now there's a couple of fellas on there. One's called Sam, the other's called Sean. They've got surnames that I won't try and pronounce either. Yeah, I don't listen to them a lot. They sort of there's sort of, I find a lot don't resonate with me, a lot of the podcasts, but I just sort of look at the titles and if one sort of it takes my interest, then I'll listen to it. They're usually fairly long sort of podcasts, so yeah, it's not sort of something that you can just sort of listen to quickly and move on. So that's number 7. And then number 8 is called Saving Capitalism by AJ Osborne. Now, in the self-storage list, AJ Osborne also does self-storage income. So he's not long started this new podcast called Saving Capitalism, and it's all about sort of capitalism in America and how it's sort of shifting and where it's going and where it came from, sort of thing. And so I find that to be very interesting, even though it's an American podcast. I find that we usually only a couple of steps behind America in Australia here, so it's always good to know the direction American politics are going and that sort of thing. So that sort of that wraps up my podcasts that I listen to. Like I said, there's 21 in total. I probably don't listen to every episode that comes out. Some I always do. Probably 50% of them that I just listed, I listen to every episode that comes out. But others I probably only listen to sort of every so often. Every second or every third episode, maybe just to whether the title takes my interest or not. And so that's probably a fairly decent wrap up. I have listened to other podcasts. I've listened to many other podcasts in the past that have either finished or have stopped resonating with me or something like that. I've found that as I've grown as a person and as my mindset has grown, I've had to give up podcasts that I've listened to in the past because I found that my mindset has outgrown them, and I think that is probably a good thing. It shows that I'm making progress in my mindset, and so that's probably about all that I have to cover on this. Kalia, what is your list?
Yeah, so I guess first I'll just touch on the ones that I listen to that you also listen to. There's a few, but there's not a lot. Like in the property space, I love the ones that Tyron Shum puts out, the Australian Property Investory ones, and then of course Sophisticated Property Investing by Frank Flagg. So they always offer like a lot of inspiration that you can draw from, and you can always pick up little ideas that they share. Even though sometimes their story may not resonate with ours, it's just simply listening to as much as you can and getting drawing ideas off them. I listened to a little bit on the crypto space, not a lot, just because crypto, it's quite a deep, quite a deep place to be in, and I feel like as though when listening to crypto stuff, you've got to be, quite undistracted, I guess. But yeah, I do listen to the Bad Crypto podcast, and like Nat said, they are a bit rough around the edges, but I do like their content, and sort of their insights, and then across the general across the general, I guess most of the podcasts that I listen to are general. So general as in general business, general mindset, sort of across the board, they touch on everything. So, yep. Love Ryan Pineda. I love the way he, I guess the way he presents and what he shares. He's very, very relaxed and very grounded. And as Nat said, he does speak his mind and he sticks to his guns on what he believes in. The Mindset Mentor, Rob Dial, he has some very good content as well, just simply, working on your mind and making yourself a better person as such. And then, the rest. So Jim Quick, about the quick brain. Occasionally I'll listen to him. Just to sort of get a bit of insight, into how the brain works and trying to understand, how you can put his exercises into practice in our own lives. Grant Cardone, the Cardone Zone. Yep. I often love his, and like his podcast, and like Nat said about the motivation side that he offers. Gary V. I listen to Gary V. Not as much as what I used to. I used to listen to every episode of Gary V. But like what Nat has just touched on about when your mindset builds, how you change your perspective and you change your vision as such. When you grow, you sort of move away, and that's what I felt a bit with Gary V. But Gary V is very. He has a very a very streamlined thought. He has a lot of drive, and it's all about drive, and it's all about pushing yourself to the next level. And he has a huge focus, of course, on social media. And I guess as you move through, as you're on a journey through your own mindset and your own business life, you can sort of take pieces from everybody and apply it to your own life. And I just feel like as though with Gary V, he has amazing ambition and amazing insight, but there comes a time when you have to bring other things into your own vision as well. So that's sort of why I've sort of moved away from Gary V. Occasionally, I still listen to him. Every episode still gets downloaded to my phone, so it's always there, but it's just a case of preference now. Sean Cannell from Think Media. Love what Sean has to share. He's also very grounded and very genuine person, so I love listening to him, and he has so many amazing insights. So that's probably all that I share with Nat. And I just wanted to touch on, before I move on to the ones that I listen to myself more so than what Nat listens to, is when we share these podcasts, especially Ryan's, even Grant Cardone's, Rob Dials, all these sorts of ones, we can then relate to each other. So if Nat listens to something, he'll come to me and say, hey, did you hear what Ryan said? And then I said, yep. And then we can share our different perspective on what they share within their podcast. So I guess I just wanted to touch on that, because I feel like as though it's important that you do have the same interest, that it's not a case of these are Nat's podcasts and these are Kalia's podcasts. It's a case of pulling together and sharing the same interest, because then you can draw on each other and you can, prop each other up, so to speak. So just to quickly touch on what I like listening to, I think my favourite podcast at the moment is by Lewis Howes. So Lewis has quite a story, as most of these people who we listen to, they do have a story behind, about their journey, and it's really inspirational. So Lewis was, a pro athlete, and he went through a very, very dark time when he had like a personal injury and then couldn't continue with his sporting career, and it sent him spiraling into some very dark places. And somehow he managed to pull himself out of that, and now he calls himself a lifestyle entrepreneur. And I guess Lewis is very open, and he's very transparent. He's very, very grounded. He's very genuine, and I guess that his journey, he can relate it so much to what his guests share with him on his podcast. So most of Lewis's podcasts are guest based, but he's very selective about who he has on his podcast. But they are all very inspirational, and they always give you an insight as to how you can relate their topic to your own life. So Lewis's podcast is called The School of Greatness, and that's his passion, is to make everybody great, and he has a real drive for that. So Lewis Howes, I highly recommend his podcast. He does also have a second one, and he calls it The Daily Motivation, but they are just little segments, whereas if you don't have time to listen to his longer podcast, because his School of Greatness podcasts are quite long, sort of, anything from 45 minutes up to like an hour and a half. But he does have a second one, the second one called The Daily Motivation, and all of those are just clips, so they're all less than 10 minutes, so they're short and they're brief, and if you've only got a short amount of time to focus on a podcast, you can quickly tap into one of them and get a quick hit of motivation and keep going. So he sort of has those two, but The School of Greatness is the one that I love the most. I listen to Ryan Serhant. business of influence. So Ryan is a massive real estate agent in New York, and so he also has quite the journey behind his story. And so on these podcasts that he does now, Ryan's had numerous different podcasts over the years, but his current one called The Business of Influence, he simply sits down and interviews. He just has like a conversation with his guests. And same story. It's just about knowing people's story and their background and where they've come from and where they've been to offer inspiration and motivation to everybody. And just another one that I really love is John Maxwell, and it's just called the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. I really like John's vision and what he teaches. So John is a leadership coach, and he is passionate about creating the world's best leaders. And he shares some amazing stuff, and he's quite comical to go with it, so you can get a laugh while getting inspired by John. So that's the Maxwell Leadership Podcast. And then there's just a couple, well, there's three actually that I listen to. And these three that I'll mention in a minute, they aren't exactly one particular person. What they do is they go and find clips of these inspirational, motivational, thought-leading people, and they put them into an episode. And then they have numerous different guests with each episode. So the first one is by Sean Croxton. He's also an American. His podcast is called The Quote of the Day Show. And so what he does, it's often a YouTube clip where he draws his podcast from. He'll just go in there and take a clip, and he'll give like a really brief outline of what his view is on it, and then he'll share the actual clip with you and then tell you where to go and find it. And so it's just a real just a one-liner virtually, and it's just a bit of background around that, and that can be very inspirational too if you're just looking for something short and sweet. The Sean Croxton the Quote of the Day Show can give you something really brief. The next one is called The Resilient Mind, and it's the same story. It does lots of different people, different guests. It goes right through from people who aren't even with us anymore, the likes of Earl Nightingale, Zig Ziglar. It covers Jim Rohn, David Goggins, Brian Tracy, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Bob Proctor, Mel Robbins, Jim Quick, Tony Robbins, all these people who are so inspirational, who are so well known in the mindset, the motivational space. They just have little episodes across all of these people. And it's just a case of, it offers me drive. If you're feeling a bit flat, you just pick up one of these podcasts, you find something that you think will resonate with you at that particular time, and you listen to it, and offers you huge drive. So Earl Nightingale, he was the first one that I wrote down on my list because they are very passionate about Earl Nightingale, and he is he's like being like an older generational sort of person. He is very, very grounded in what he teaches, and it's back to basic sort of stuff, and it's just a case of working on your mind. And the third one who also does those sorts of clips where it's just different people combined into one episode is called Daily Motivations, and their main focus is on David Goggins, and those who know David Goggins would know his drive, and again his story that's behind it that has built that drive into him, and that is powerful. Daily Motivations is powerful, and it's just all about drive, and it's all about getting out there and taking action. So that's sort of my top favourite ones that I listen to consistently. Just moving on to some others that listen to on occasion, sort of when you got the time and the headspace to listen to. Jay Shetty, his podcast is called On Purpose, and he is mostly, he's sort of a bit more like on a personal journey, not so much business/mindset. He's more personal, and so he helps you. He talks a lot through, like any family issues you're going through, any work relationship issues, those sorts of things. Those more personal based things Jay Shetty touches on. So he's he has an amazing following, Jay Shetty. Again, a very, very grounded person. He has very high morals. And then so a few others that I've got listed here that I listen to just on occasion at the right place, the right time. Dean Graziosi, which he is a partner to Tony Robbins. His is called Own Your Future, and same thing. It's just about mindset and inspiration. The Brad Sugars podcast is called the Big Success Podcast. I listen to him because he has guests on his show, and same story. They talk about how they found their success and how they built it up and how they continue on. Pace Morby from Get Creative. He also has an amazing real estate story. He shares his story, how he was brought up in a massive family. I think it's one of 13 that he is. And he saw his parents struggling to raise the family. And so he has built up a massive empire in the US as well. So that's Pace Morby. And then, of course, Tony Robbins from the Tony Robbins podcast. Tony Robbins, it's often with his wife, Sage. And so same story. Very, I guess what I find with Tony Robbins is that they're quite relaxing. They're not so much, get out there and get you fired up. They're more so, keep you grounded and keep you focused, and very, very, soft, I guess is the word you'd use. And just finally, a couple of new ones that I've come across that I've only listened to, 1 or 2 episodes of, before we produce this podcast of our own. Dipna Boholt, she's an Australian lady. Her podcast is called I Love Real Estate. And I only came across her, I found her online on Facebook, I think. And she resonates with the same concept that we have in the real estate space. So she's all about cash flow. And so she has some awesome episodes about how to, build a real estate portfolio in Australia. Gina DeVee, Divine Living. She, of course, Gina DeVee is more like a female, like a women-based podcast. The men wouldn't get too much inspiration of her. But Divine Living, it's just a case of talking, women through hassles, issues, dramas that we face in our life and how to manage them and how to manage our mind, our emotions, all these sorts of things that come part and parcel with being a woman. And then the Mel Robbins podcast. And so that's a new one. I've only listened to a couple of episodes of Mel herself, but I have heard her a lot on the other podcasts that I have listened to as guests, and as short clips and those sorts of things. So that's sort of what I wanted to share with you in my scope. I guess in comparison to what Nat listens to, Nat has a lot of business, and a lot of topic-based podcasts, where I'm a bit more across the board, more mindset, motivational, because that's sort of where I get my drive from. So anything else you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, no, that's great. We'd never counted up between us how many we listened to, but that must be a massive amount between us all. Just while Carly was talking, I thought of something I heard of when probably about maybe 12 months ago, something like that, and I really can't remember exactly where I heard it even, but whoever was talking about it was saying that you need to look at your car as a university on wheels. And what they meant by that was that don't waste a trip going somewhere, driving somewhere without listening to a podcast or something that's going to teach you something. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that, because that is where we do listen to a lot of podcasts, is because we live at least 2.5 hours from our closest town. It means that we have a lot of time on the roads, and we got a lot of time that we can use listening to a podcast and learning something. And somebody else said, I can't think who that was either, but they said I think it might have been Frank Flegg. Another one of Frank Flegg's is every day is a school day, and this other quote I was thinking of was, if you've lived a day and haven't learnt something, then you've wasted that day. And so this is why in this age of podcasts, it just makes it so easy to learn stuff. If I'm on the machines, or driving one of the machines, you do that all day long, well, you can get in sort of like 5 or 6 podcasts in one day, and by the end of it, you've done a full day's work. But your mind is absolutely spinning for how much you've learnt from all this stuff that you never knew, simply because of the podcasts that you've been listening to. So, that's sort of what I wanted to just touch on there. Now, we didn't actually talk about this before we started recording, but can we get links to... Yeah, so we'll put in links in the show notes about all these different podcasts that we listen to, so that anybody listening to this can look them up if some of them resonate with you. This list of podcasts that we listen to is not to downplay anybody else's podcast. There's a lot of other podcasts that I would like to listen to, but it's just a case of the amount of podcasts that we already listen to. It's just a case of trying to prioritise what you really want to focus on. There's other podcasters in our area, for instance, that I would like to listen to on a regular basis. And this list of podcasts that we've got here, especially for myself, I do listen to other podcasts from time to time, local podcasters and that sort of thing. But it's sort of, I don't sort of do it as regularly as the other podcasts, simply because it's a time thing. So I just wanted to point that out, that any other podcasters that I haven't listed here, and that sort of thing. I don't want anybody to feel left out or anything, but it's just a case of that. This is the list that sort of works with me, and that's what I listen to on a regular basis. So that's sort of that's about all I've got to say. Do you want to have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, reiterate what you just touched on about listening, constantly. Like for me myself, we've had a bit of a business direction change at the moment, but I used to cook a lot of gourmet preserves on my feet all day in the cookhouse, so always had a podcast going. But now that I've moved away from that, it doesn't matter so much what I'm doing, whether I'm mowing the lawn or I'm outside doing some gardening or I'm in the kitchen doing some baking or washing up even, there's always a podcast going. And what I find is people say to me, oh, but I don't have time to listen. And I always think that sometimes you don't always have to have your 100% attention on the podcast itself. But if you're listening to something, you are planting that seed within your subconscious mind, and one day, if you keep feeding that will then come to fruition. That will, I guess, bloom in your life. So no matter what we're doing, it's always in our ears. There's always something playing in our ears, offering us inspiration and motivation. And I guess this is too why every podcast that we've touched on is I guess based on self-development. So what I'm saying is we don't listen to anything about sport or anything about movies or these sorts of things that are just simply, I guess, pleasures in life, because they first of all, they don't inspire us one bit, they don't motivate us, and they don't benefit us in any way. And so that's why everything we listen to is all about, I guess, drive and building ourselves and growing within ourselves. But yeah, it's always a case of, consciously listening to something and constantly feeding our mind and inspiring ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking when you said that, actually, how that sometimes I'll listen to a podcast and be not fully focused on it, and then maybe 3 days later you'll listen to a different podcast that will touch on something similar, and suddenly your mind will go straight back to that, what you heard, well, actually listened to but didn't really take it on board, and then suddenly you remember actually the podcast that you couldn't even remember 5 minutes after you listened to it, because this second one will be that close to saying the same thing by somebody else that then you say, oh, okay, that's what that meant there, that I didn't even actually take that on board. And so yeah, it's just a case of continuously listening. Like Carlia said, it's just if you're doing something that doesn't require your 100% attention, then we have a podcast going on in the background. And so yeah, it's just all about continuous learning for us. Did you have?
No, not really. I guess the only other thing is that I would touch on is that a significant amount of my podcast, it's not just a case of listening to them once. I listen to them again and again and again. For example, especially the likes of Zig Ziglar, because I just love the way he teaches, the way he speaks, and yeah, like just constantly listening over and over again. And like I've probably heard his things, dozens and dozens of times, but I just constantly love listening to it. And it's just about the repetition you put within your mind, and about feeding your mind on the right things.
Yeah, I think it was Albert Einstein who said that it takes something it takes listening to something 8 times before you actually hear it properly in your brain. That's. I think this episode will wrap up here. We have nothing more to add. So that's about all on this one, and keep living the dream.